I don't know about you, but I have moments where I feel like, whether it's in worship, whether it's on a Sunday morning as we're in the gathering, whether it's in my own personal time, whether it's time with my family, I have moments where, one, I'm not really feeling what it is that we sing in those songs, whether that be at home or whether that be here. Some moments where I just feel empty. Anybody else ever had those moments where you just feel empty? I don't know about you. Sometimes it has to do with worship. Sometimes it just has to do with life. But my cup just feels like there's nothing in it. You know, I've been running and I've been using up everything that I have inside of me. And if somebody were to ask me, how do you feel in this moment? I'd say, like I've got nothing to give. Like there's nothing left. I'm running on empty here. And I might come into a place like this and I see others and I go, man, why don't I feel what they're feeling at this moment? And I'm not just talking about because they're moving around and they're clapping their hands and they're raising their hands, they're jumping up and down. I mean, sometimes you can just see on somebody's face that they are, whatever word you want to use, they're feeling it, they're fuller, they're more in touch with the Spirit that morning. Worship is just flowing out of them. And I sit and I look at myself and I go, but I don't have any of that right now. Anybody feel a little bit of that? Not necessarily in this moment, but are you tracking with what it is that I'm talking about? Give me some nods, give me some amens. I don't care what. Okay, I just want to make sure like this isn't just me, because I can have conversations with myself all week long. This is our time together here. And so I'll start to try and do things to fill up my cup. And there are times where, you know, as we go through life, we might feel like, you know, I'm not like full of energy. I'm not feeling full of the Spirit at this moment, but I'm not running on complete empty. Like my cup it's half full. Or maybe we get to those points where we're like, you know, at this moment, my cup is full. Anybody this morning as you walk in here, you're like, my cup feels full this morning? Anyone? Good, that's awesome. I love it when people are like, man, my cup feels full. But what I've found for myself, I have some friends in my life, I have some other pastors in my life, that it seems like everywhere they go, they have a story. And the story has something to do with somebody that walked into their life and they couldn't help but share Jesus with that person. They couldn't help but have the Spirit just be all around them, to where this person came in and they could tell there was something. The conversations that I've heard some of my friends have are incredible conversations. Or those people that you're around and you're sitting there and you're going, man, they are just exuding this confidence in Jesus right now. That we had at Highland Park, where I came from in Casper, Wyoming, we had a mission that was we were going to have 50,000 Jesus conversations a year. And so we would, not individually, that's a lot of conversations. I don't know if I have 50,000 conversations a year, period. But as a church, we were going to have 50,000 Jesus conversations throughout the course of the year, so that people in Casper, Wyoming knew about Jesus. And we would talk about these Jesus conversations that we had throughout the week. And sometimes I would sit there and I'd be like, man, I go out, and I'm not going to lie, I just want to sit at my table at the restaurant and not have anybody talk to me. Like, I want the wait staff to come up, ask me my order, and then leave. Anybody feel that way? And I'm hearing them talk about going to a restaurant, and they have like this 10-minute conversation with the waiter. I'm like, good night. Like, I get on an airplane, and I sit down next to somebody, and it's like, earbuds in, tuning the world out. Sarah and I were fortunate enough to go down to Florida last week and hang out with a bunch of pastors. And on our flight back, we sat next to one of those people that as soon as you sit down, they introduce themselves. And then they start asking you about yourself. And you're sitting there going, oh, the audacity. Who talks to somebody on an airplane? I don't even talk to my wife on the airplane. In fact, the last time I flew with a friend on an airline, I looked at him before we sat down and said, hey, just so you know, we're not talking while we sit here. I'm going to put my earbuds in and watch a movie. And he's like, oh, thank goodness. I was hoping you didn't want to talk either. We were a perfect couple to fly. But there are people that it just overflows, and I hear of these friends who they would sit on an airplane, and the next thing they know, the person they're sitting next to is saying, I want this Jesus that you're telling me about. And I sit there and go, why don't I have that? My cup is full. But here's what I've learned about a cup that is full. Is that, well, two things really. One, every time I take a sip, it's less full. There's less of it. So it goes back down. And as I do things, it starts getting closer and closer to empty again. But the other thing that I've learned about a cup that is full, there's really not anything in there for others. It is enough for me, and I feel good, but there's not anything in there for other people. See, an empty cup, I've got nothing to give. In a full cup, I've got enough to keep myself satisfied. But as we read in Psalm 23 in verse 5, we read the psalmist David writing about how his cup overflows. And I believe that what God is offering us is not a full cup. God is offering us a cup that overflows. And when you have a cup that overflows, church, there is plenty for the people around you. You can share and not feel like I'm running out. See, when I try to fill this cup on my own, the cup starts to run on empty. But when I go to the Spirit and I say, no, I need you to fill my cup, and I need you to overflow my cup, I don't have to worry about it. It doesn't start running. Actually, I just ran out of water just at that moment. Of course I did. I can drink out of the overflowing cup, and it still stays full. I had a waitress one time when we went to Texas Roadhouse with a group of friends in college that she was the best waitress I had ever had because our cups never ran empty. But what they did do is they flowed all over the table. Now you could say that's a really big mess, and it was, but man, we never had to ask her to come fill our cups. She kept it full, and the Spirit is offering us, church, to have a cup that overflows. But it doesn't always do that. Mine doesn't always do that. I don't know about yours. I told you that we got to go down to Florida last week, and it was to hang out with about 1,000 pastors and their spouses. And we sat in a room. We had 2 30-minute sessions, and during these 30-minute sessions, we worshiped together. And church, I can tell you this. I looked around that room, and I saw cups that were overflowing. And as I sat in that room, my cup didn't just fill. My cup overflowed. And I understand that we don't always feel that way. We can sit there and we can say, but I read my Bible, I go to church, I pray, I serve, and my cup is not overflowing. Church, we can fall into the trap really quickly of trying to fill our own cups and trying to do all the things that will fill. Now, all of those things are something the Spirit can use to fill our cups, but how often do I do those things to fill my own cup? And so this morning, as we continue in worship together, I pose a question to you. Maybe you're sitting there and you're saying, my cup is not overflowing. Maybe it's full and I'm feeling pretty good, but when I leave here, like it's business as usual and it's back into the world and the cup starts draining, and it's definitely not just constantly being full and overflowing. And I want that, but I don't know how to have that. My question to you is, when was the last time you asked for that? In Jeremiah 29:13, we read that you will seek me and find me when you search for me with all of your heart. And in James 4, verse 2, the brother of Jesus, James, writes these words: you do not have because you do not ask. And so, church, I have sat there, I don't know how many times in my life going, why isn't my cup overflowing? Why don't I feel the Spirit the way that that person sitting 2 seats down from me obviously feels the Spirit? Why is it that when I walk out of here, I don't overflow to the people around me, and I constantly feel like I'm being drained and drained? And church, I will be honest with you, I don't always ask for it. I just try and do it by myself. So my question for you this morning as we continue is, when was the last time you asked for an overflowing cup? And unless it was this morning, I encourage you to ask for it this morning. God, will you overflow my cup? Will you overflow our cups as we continue to worship here this morning, to worship you, the Creator, to worship you, the one who loves us, to worship you, the one who died for us and gave your life for the things that we've done, and who tells us if we will draw near to you, you will draw near to us, to seek you and we will find you, that you are the worst hide and seek player ever. God, to you we worship, and to you, again, I can only truly speak for myself. I want to feel an overflowing cup and to have an overflowing cup. And I pray that you would do that this morning, that I would not hold it back, that I would not drain it this morning, but that I would allow you to overflow my cup. Amen. Jenny Allen, in her book Untangled, which many of you have read in this room, especially many of you ladies who went through a book study on this book, she makes a comment in there at one point that there is, and I'm going to read it up here so that I don't just give you my paraphrase. There's nothing worse than a Bible verse that seems to help everyone but you. Have any of you ever sat there, and actually I'm not even going to ask it because I know that for most of us this is true. We have sat there and we have heard a pastor or we have heard a friend give us a Bible verse, and it seems to be one that just connects to the deepest parts of their soul, and you're sitting there and you're going, that did nothing for me. That's not helping me at all. See, Justin, I hear you up there saying that the psalmist wrote that my cup overflows, and I hear you saying that if we will ask, then he'll give it to us, but I just spent 2 songs asking him, and I still don't feel as if my cup is overflowing this morning. And maybe you'll even leave here today and you'll continue to feel like I'm asking him, but I still don't feel like my cup is overflowing. I've been there. I've been there right with you. Now, she was talking about a completely different Bible verse, and it had all to do with emotions and all this type of stuff. I don't remember which emotion she was talking about at the moment, but I was like, man, that fits. We hear this all the time, where if you'll just do what Scripture says, then this is how you'll feel, and you walk away and you're like, but I'm not feeling that. And so while I do ask you this morning to really, truly look inside and say, when was the last time that I asked him to overflow my cup? I also understand that there are other things at play here that can sometimes get in the way of our cup overflowing. One of those, and we talk about this often in here, is that we have an enemy who wants nothing more than for us to walk around with an empty cup. Or maybe even at moments he's sitting there going, you know what? I am perfectly fine with you having a full cup, because a full cup means you feel good, but at least you're not spreading it around to everybody else. I think we have an enemy who actually loves it when we come in here on Sunday morning and feel good as long as we leave here and don't do anything about it. He's like, I'll give you your hour of feeling close to God. You give me the other, I should have done the math to see how many hours were in the rest of the week. You give me the rest of the hours of the week, and you can have your hour. I think he's fine with that. So we have an enemy that is fighting against this. But in James chapter 4, I think he gives us another reason that sometimes gets in the way. And before I jump in, and before I just start telling somebody else's story, I'm actually going to ask Pastor Mike to come up here, and he's going to help me share what I'm talking about here. Pastor Mike, we should have grabbed you, Mike. Yeah, there's one over there. While you're grabbing that mic, I'm going to give some backstory here. Most of you know that Mike and his wife Liz and their two children, Edith and Esther, they got here in April. Yes, April. I almost said March. They got here in April, and they immediately started looking for a house because we like to be settled. I mean, they had a place to live, but they wanted something that was theirs and a place that was going to be long-term, a place that they could invest in, a place that they could call their own. Many of us are in the same boat. We love having that house that is our house. And so they started looking for a house, and they found one in Fritchton. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. They found a house up in Fritchton, but there was something wrong. I mean, it's not a brand new house, right?
Right.
And really, go ahead.
Yeah. So it was built in the 70s. So, yeah, when you go to look at houses that weren't just built yesterday, and maybe it's true when you build a house yesterday. I've never brought a brand new house before.
I've talked to a lot of people who have built their home and then immediately went, I wish I had done this instead.
Yeah. So I mean, we saw some things that we thought we might want to take a closer look at that, right? Before we just commit to spending basically all of the money that we had to put into, a down payment on this place. And so we had an inspector come out and look around.
So when you had this inspector come and look around, was there any part of the house that you're like, hey, we're pretty sure that there's something going on in that part of the house, so please don't go there?
Well, there was some things where, like, for example, the way that the dryer was vented, I thought, well, there could be a mold problem there, and so we better have somebody come and check for mold. And they found mold in a spot that we weren't expecting. There is so we bought a tri-level home. So underneath the single level side, there's a crawl space, and I didn't even realize that there was a crawl space under there when we had first looked at it, because the only way you can get to it is through a closet that was full of stuff. The people that were selling their home had that closet full, and so. Yeah, I didn't realize it, but through this hidden trap door, there's this crawl space, and it had some mold in there.
Okay. So you found the mold. I'm assuming that they looked over the entire house.
Yes.
They didn't just find it in the spot and then stop, but they looked the whole house over.
Right.
Okay. So then you bought the home.
Yes.
Still had mold in the home.
Yes.
Did you just cordon off? Like, what'd you do with that spot at that point?
Well, here's the thing. I have asthma, so in other words, out of all the things in this whole world that I could have been bad at, I had to be bad at breathing. So mold in the home is kind of a big deal. We didn't want that, and I know there's other health reasons to be concerned about mold, but we had, as part of the transaction to buy the home, the seller was going to, and that's one of the fun parts about when you buy a place, is you can negotiate who's going to pay for what. We got to negotiate with the seller and say, we'll buy the place if you guys pay to have that fixed, pay to have the mold fixed. So yeah, we contracted with the company to come in and get rid of it, to treat that part of the house.
So, but you moved in, it hadn't been done, and then you lived there for a little bit, and there was actually, I can't remember if the picture went out on Facebook or if it was just texted around, but it wasn't actually your asthma that acted up the worst. It was your wife's allergies.
Yeah, yes? we didn't realize that her allergies were quite as bad as they were, but we weren't there for very long, and it could have been there's some wildflowers that were blooming at the same time, but we don't know for sure. But yeah, she had some allergic reaction stuff happening too.
So then what'd you do?
Well, she had to go to the doctor.
Okay.
Yeah,
was it on Facebook? I can't remember if everybody saw it or if that was... Okay. That's why I didn't throw it up on the screen. I didn't want you to kill me later.
Yeah, she woke up one morning and like her one eye was swelled shut, and I'm like, man, people are going to start talking around town here. I was a little nervous. For those that didn't hear, she said, no, I walked downstairs and you went, oh.
Young people who aren't married yet, don't ever look at your wife and go, "Ooh."
It wasn't a voice of disgust. It was a voice of concern. What's wrong? What happened? So, yeah, we had to take care of the problem though, and so it took a little while for them to get out and to make that work happen. But when it did, it was one of those things where we needed to kind of clear out of the house and let them do the work.
Okay.
And so we spent a couple of days away from home, and they treated the area. They kind of sectioned off that part of the house and just focused on that part with that treatment. And it was a very intentional, very direct, very surgical, get rid of that and build in solutions so it doesn't happen again. So.
Okay, so one final question, and I think everyone probably already knows the answer of it anyway, but I'm going to ask it.
Okay.
When you brought them in for the mold remediation, there was obviously one spot in the house, one part of the house that was the problem.
Yes.
Did you let them into that part of the house?
Yeah.
Okay, so they didn't just take care of all the spots that were good. They went into the spot that was bad.
Right.
That was actually 3 more questions. I understand that, but
here,
I'm a pastor. I get 4 closings.
So, yeah, here's the thing. I mean, it was kind of an awkward moment too, because I showed them where the room was that they were going to be working, and they're like, "Oh, this is going to be difficult to get in and out of here because it's a crawl space." So I could tell by the workers, they're like, "Oh, we've got our work cut out for us." Sorry, guys. Didn't give you more headspace there.
All right, thanks, man.
Yep.
Thank you. In James chapter 4 and verse 2, we read that you do not have because you do not ask. But if we continue on into verse 3, it says you ask and don't receive because you ask with wrong motives, so that you may spend it on your evil desires. Adulteresses, don't you know that friendship with the world is hostility toward God? So whoever wants to be the world's friend becomes God's enemy. Or do you think it's without reason the scripture says that the Spirit who lives in us yearns jealously, but he gives greater grace? Therefore he says, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Therefore submit to God, but resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, sinners, and purify your hearts, double-minded people. Be miserable and mourn and weep. Your laughter must change to mourning and your joy to sorrow. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. Church, what I want to offer up this morning as we read these words of the brother of Christ is that if we are looking for this overflowing cup that we talked about earlier, we have to stop hiding rooms in our heart from God. We have to stop limiting where we'll let him work in our lives. I'm assuming that you have been like me and that you have sat in a service at some point and you said, God, I am going to give you everything. God, take everything that I have. Maybe your hands were raised during it. Maybe your eyes were closed during it. Maybe it was through a speaker. Maybe it was through some worship songs. Maybe it wasn't any of those things and it was a totally different setting. But there may have been a time in your life where you said, God, all of it is yours. And then you walked out of that service or that moment and you got into life, what we call life, because we like to separate the spiritual from our lives, which problem number 1. But we walk out into what we call the real world, and we begin to cling to the things that were holding us back in the first place. James uses a pretty strong word there when he names us for what we are when we do that. He calls us adulteresses. He calls us people who cheat on other people. Think about how strong that is. How big of a deal that is to call somebody that. But when we cling to the previous life, when we cling to any pieces of the previous life, That's exactly what we're being. Before I met Sarah and before I started dating Sarah, I had other girlfriends. Sometimes I tell my kids that now. The older Keely and Tegan, they're getting old enough, that doesn't surprise them. Judah is still at that stage where like, what? You had a girlfriend before mom? You can't do that. I mean, Judah just jumped straight into marrying somebody at 4 or 5 years old. So, he just went all in. But the girls, they were surprised back in the day when I'd say, yeah, I had another girlfriend in college. Now imagine what it would be like and what it would do to our marriage if as I fell in love with Sarah and and let's not get into the whole falling in love and all that stuff. But as I fell in love with Sarah and I married Sarah, imagine what would have happened if I kept those previous feelings that I had for a girl named Miranda. And imagine what would happen if, as Sarah and I went along in our relationship, in our marriage, I sat there thinking, man, I remember when Miranda and I went on that date, and it was such a good date, and I wish I could go on a date with her again. I wish I could have that back. Now, truth be told, the only date that I remember with Miranda, and I'm assuming she's never going to watch the sermon, so I'm not going to get in trouble again for it, it was the worst date that I ever had. So that definitely helped. Probably should have changed her name. But anyway, it's fine. But what if I sat there and I just continually longed for my previous girlfriends? And then eventually started up the relationship with my previous girlfriends all over again? What if I hid in my heart the affections for Miranda or Lindsay or Tammy? I think that's the only three I can remember. I don't know. It was one a year from 5th grade to freshman year of college, and they were a month or less apiece. But what if I hid affections in my heart for them? And I continued to yearn for and long for those relationships, and they drew me back towards them. I can tell you pretty assuredly, I think, that Sarah and I would not have the relationship that we have. There would be troubles and strife, and I would have constant feelings of being with Sarah and going, why don't I feel full and overflowing in my relationship with my wife? Church, maybe you've had people over to your house at some point and you take them through your house and you're giving them the tour. I know when we first bought homes, we gave people the tour of our whole house. Now we buy homes and people are like, we don't care. But when we first bought a home, we would take them on a tour through the house. Or when my family comes and visits or friends come and visit, I take them on a tour of this building. But there's always like that room or two that we just don't show. Here it would be the upper attic, which is an absolute disaster. I mean, every now and then Kathy cleans it and makes it organized, and that lasts for all of a month because we destroy it all over again. But at home, we have this weird room at the top of our stairs that when we show people our home, we don't show them that room. And I venture to say that maybe we don't have the overflowing cups that we're asking for because we're asking for them but saying, but God, not here. God, not this spot. God, I'll give you everything except... And maybe it's because we're still in love with what the world has to offer. Maybe there's that guilty pleasure that we have that we're like, God, I will give you everything, but man, I really enjoy fill in your blank. And I'm afraid to let God into that part of my heart because I'm afraid He'll say, no, I need you to give that to me. Or maybe we're sitting there and we're going, I can't let God into this room because I know what He's going to do. He's going to say, you need to forgive. And you need to let go of bitterness. And I'm sitting there going, but that was unforgivable, and that bitterness makes me feel alive, even though when we're really honest, we know the bitterness is tearing us apart, but we hold on to it because that was an unforgivable thing that somebody did to us. And so we say, God, anywhere but there. Or we have that room that it's full of the mold. And we're ashamed of the room that's full of mold. And so we say, God, there is all of this space. You can have all of this space, but please Don't go in there. My shame and my guilt in that room are too high, God. And I can't let you see that. So God, anywhere in my heart but there. Some of the things we don't let him in because we truly enjoy them. And some of the things we don't let him in because we are so ashamed of them. And either way, he is sitting there saying, if you want the cup that overflows, you've got to let me in everywhere. Every last piece. The irony of holding back the room because we're ashamed of it is that he already knows about the room. Imagine if the Kwanzas had invited the people to do mold remediation who knew that the mold was in the crawl space, and they said, but we're embarrassed about the crawl space, so stay out of there. And the people are sitting there going, then why are we here? Why did you bring us? In church, when we limit where God can go and what God can do, he's sitting there going, why did you invite me in the first place? If you won't let me do my job, why are you even giving the words? And so sometimes we don't have a cup that overflows because we simply just don't ask. And sometimes we ask and we have the wrong motives. And sometimes we ask, but we tell him, but I only want it to this point. Maybe just a tiny trickle down the outside of the glass, but please, not the mess that is all over our pastor's shoe and making his toe feel really uncomfortable right now and all over the top step. Like, we don't want that, God, because I don't want to be known as the fanatic who talks about you everywhere that they go. God, those people are weird, and I don't want to be a weird person. God, I see the person who goes into the worship service and can't help but just have it just exude out of them. I don't want to be that person, God. God, I don't want to be that person who is just crazy generous with what that you have given them. I don't want to be that person. And he's saying, then why are you asking? Because that's what it is when I overflow your cup. I've mentioned this verse several times. It's another one the psalmist writes in Psalm 139. This is what it is when we invite him in. The psalmist writes, search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my concerns. See if there is any offensive way in me. Not see if there are these offensive ways in me. See if there is any offensive way in me and lead me in the everlasting way. Church, this doesn't say, search me, God, and know the parts of my heart that I'll let you see. Test me on the things that I want you to test me on. See if there are some offensive ways in me and let me lead you to the way that I want you to take me. But no, it says, search me and you lead and you reveal. God, I'm letting you in everywhere. So this week, I wasn't sure this really fit, but I think it does. This week I went to Casey's over in Washington. I was heading over to get my eyes checked, and I wanted something to drink to go into the eye doctor. And so I stopped in and I got a drink, and I was wearing my MC worship shirt that you've seen some of the worship team wear that Courtney designed and gave to the worship team and to the staff. And so we have one of those, and I was wearing this, and I'm not going to lie to you. There are days where I'm looking at my shirts to wear and I go, I don't want to wear that shirt. Because then people are going to know that I'm proclaiming to follow Jesus. And they might ask me questions. And they might expect me to act like a Christian. And today I just don't want to. I know that sounds horrible. I'm not saying like I just want to be like, today I just want to sin as much as I want. That's not what I'm getting at here. But today, I don't want them to look at me and think, oh, there's one of those crazy Christian people. And so I have those days, but that day I put it on. And I walked into Casey's and I got my drink and I was getting ready to check out, and Dylan was the cashier who was checking me out, and he looked at me and he said, "So I see your shirt. And I'm going through a really hard time right now. Would you pray for me?" And so standing there and lined out, it went through my head really fast. Like, I could give him the, "Yeah, man, I'll pray for you," and pay for my stuff and get out the door and go to the eye doctor. I mean, it's a good chance that's what he was looking for in the first place. And I had one of those overflowing cup moments where I said, "Dude, I will absolutely do that. Can I pray for you right here?" I'm imagining there were some people who thought we were weird and we were fanatics. And in that moment, I just didn't care. Because when he overflows out of, and I'm not saying I always feel that way and I always do those things, but when he overflows out of your spirit, when you've truly given him every room in your heart, you find freedom that you only thought that you had before. And so, church, I ask you this morning, what room are you hiding from the Spirit? That may just be the thing that is holding you back from an overflowing cup. What room? I know that we went through generations in the church where every sermon ended with an altar call. And then we went through a generation in the church where no sermons ended with an altar call, because that's only what the fanatical old people in the church did before us, and we didn't want to be the old people anymore. And I don't know if I'm just getting to be an old person, or if I'm realizing that maybe the older people in the room knew something when they were growing up. But church, I believe that when we're asking this question, what room are we holding back, that for some of us, the very first room is God saying, "I want you to draw near to me right here." And we're sitting there going, "But God, not that. God, not that. I can't go that far, because everyone around me is going to wonder what's wrong with me, and they're going to think I'm just a crazy, fanatical Christian. They're going to wonder what sin that I'm dealing with this morning." I know all the different thoughts because I've had all the different thoughts. "God, I went to the altar last week. I can't go 2 weeks in a row." But church, the more I draw near to him, the more I believe that when he is calling us in moments like this, he's saying, don't wait to walk out those doors to take a step. I hate pews in a sanctuary, because I think they tell us that we have to stay put. And so we hide our room from him in our pew. And so this morning, if he is calling out to you and saying, "This is the room, you need to let me in," I invite you to come down here and to say, "God, the door is open. Go in. Search my heart. Reveal any offensive way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way." What room is it, church?